Emma was a 12-year-old girl who had known the world through the lens of a wheelchair since she could remember. A condition that weakened her muscles had confined her to a life where the simple act of walking was beyond her reach. Yet, despite her limitations, Emma had never felt sorry for herself. Instead, she learned to navigate her world with grace, using her chair to explore the beauty of the world around her. Her family, too, had always embraced her condition with a spirit of resilience, never letting it dampen their love for life, especially their love for nature. They lived in a modest home near the Evergreen National Park, a place of towering trees, winding paths, and peaceful meadows. It was a haven for Emma and her family, a sanctuary where they could reconnect with the earth, breathe fresh air, and escape from the worries of daily life. Every weekend, they would venture into the park, whether it was to hike the trails or simply sit by the edge of a stream, allowing the sounds of the forest to calm their minds. For Emma, those trips were a source of joy and inspiration. The beauty of the park, with its rustling leaves and the call of distant birds, filled her with a sense of peace that she couldn't find anywhere else. But what Emma loved most about the park wasn't the trees or the flowers. It was the animals, from the tiniest squirrels to the majestic deer. Emma had always been drawn to the creatures of the wild. She had a special talent for capturing their essence with just a few strokes of her pencil. Sitting quietly in the fields near her home, she would draw for hours, sketching the animals that wandered through the tall grasses or perched in the trees. Her loyal service dog, Charlie, was always by her side. Charlie, a golden retriever with soft, loving eyes, had been with Emma for as long as she could remember. The two were inseparable. Charlie had been trained to help Emma with everyday tasks. But more than that, he was her constant companion, her protector, and her friend. Whether it was a simple walk through the park or a long afternoon spent sketching, Charlie was always there, sitting beside her, his presence a comfort she had come to rely on. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed the park in a warm glow, Emma wheeled herself out to the edge of the meadow. She had a new sketchbook in hand, her favorite pencil ready to capture whatever wildlife might appear. The trees were turning shades of red and orange, and the air was cool with the scent of fallen leaves. Charlie trotted beside her, his tail wagging, sniffing the ground as they made their way to their usual spot near a large oak tree. Emma settled into her chair, her back resting against the tree, and began to draw. Her eyes scanned the meadow, searching for any signs of movement, any creatures that might be nearby. She loved the quiet moments, the ones when she could simply be still and let the world come to her. She had learned that patience was a key part of her art, and in life, too. It was in the stillness that the true beauty of nature revealed itself. Charlie lay down at her feet, his body curled up in the grass, ever watchful, but content to simply be there. Emma smiled at him, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. He was more than just a service dog. He was a friend. Someone who understood her better than anyone else. They shared a unique connection, one that was unspoken but deeply felt. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emma noticed something unusual. A movement on the far edge of the field caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just the wind rustling through the grass. But then she saw it again, a flash of brown fur. Her heart skipped a beat. A deer, its coat a rich, autumn brown, was slowly making its way toward the meadow. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. It wasn't often that she saw a deer so close, and she knew this was a rare opportunity to capture one in her sketchbook. She held her breath, her hand steady as she began to sketch. The deer moved cautiously, its large, dark eyes scanning the field, its ears twitching at every sound. Emma had learned over the years that animals could sense when they were being observed. And she didn't want to startle it. She moved as quietly as possible, focusing on the shape of the deer's body, the way its muscles rippled under its coat as it moved gracefully through the field. Charlie, sensing Emma's attention on the deer, lifted his head, his eyes following the animal's movements. He didn't bark or move, he simply watched, ever alert. Emma smiled at Charlie, grateful for his calm presence. Together, they watched the deer, sharing a moment of quiet wonder. The deer took a few more steps forward, its head dipping low to nibble on the grass. It was so close now that Emma could see the faint flicker of its nostrils, the soft curve of its neck. She couldn't believe how still and serene it looked. There was something magical about seeing the creature so close, as though the forest had paused to allow her this brief encounter. Just as Emma was finishing the last details of her sketch, something unexpected happened. The deer suddenly looked up, its ears standing straight as it stared directly at her. For a long moment, their eyes locked. Emma's heart skipped a beat. And for a fleeting instant, she felt as if the deer understood her, really understood her. It wasn't just a creature of the wild, it was a fellow being, sharing a moment of connection. And in that moment, Emma felt a deep sense of peace, as though the world had stopped, just for her, just for this beautiful exchange. Charlie, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stood up and moved closer to Emma, his body protective but gentle. He nudged her with his nose, reminding her that they were in this together. Emma stroked his fur, her hand steady and calm. She felt a wave of gratitude for her loyal companion, for the connection they shared, and for the peaceful beauty of the moment. As the deer finally turned and walked slowly back into the forest, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had witnessed something special, something that only a few people ever got to experience. It wasn't just the drawing, the act of capturing nature on paper. It was the connection, the shared moment with a creature that, for just a brief second, had crossed the boundary between the wild and the human. As the deer disappeared into the trees, Emma sat back in her chair, her heart full. She looked down at her sketchbook, the image of the deer now forever etched on the page. It was more than just a drawing, it was a memory, a reminder of the beauty that surrounded her, and the deep connection she had with the world around her. With Charlie by her side, Emma wheeled herself back toward home, the quiet sounds of the forest accompanying her. She knew that the world was full of these special moments, and she was grateful for every one of them. Whether it was a deer in a meadow or the quiet companionship of Charlie, Emma understood that these were the things that made life truly special. It was another quiet afternoon in the meadow near Emma's house. The crisp autumn air rustled the golden leaves of the trees, and the scent of pine mixed with the cool breeze that swept through the evergreen national park. Emma sat comfortably in her wheelchair, her sketchbook propped up in her lap, and her loyal service dog, Charlie, lying peacefully at her feet. She had spent hours observing the animals in the area, capturing their movements with the careful precision of her pencil. The deer had been the focus of her drawings recently, but today, her attention was captured by something different. As she sketched the gentle curve of a tree branch, A flicker of movement caught her eye on the far edge of the meadow. It wasn't the usual small animals that darted across the grass, but something much larger. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she turned her head to look more closely. From the dense trees of the forest, a massive brown figure emerged, its silhouette distinct against the backdrop of the fading light. A bear. Emma froze, her fingers pausing mid-sketch. Charlie, sensing the change in the air, immediately stood up, his posture alert, his ears were pricked, and his eyes scanned the direction of the approaching figure. Emma could feel her heart begin to race. But there was something unusual about this moment. Even though she felt a flutter of concern in her chest, she didn't feel the fear she might have expected. Something about the way the bear moved, the calmness of its pace, told her that it wasn't coming to attack. It wasn't a threat. The bear was large, truly massive, and its powerful muscles rippled under its thick fur as it walked steadily toward her. Emma's first instinct was to retreat, to wheel herself quickly back toward the safety of her house. But something inside her held her still. She couldn't explain it, but she didn't want to move. It was as though the bear wasn't just a wild animal, it was something more. Something that could sense her presence and intentions. Charlie growled softly, his body tense. He was always protective of Emma, especially in situations like this, and she appreciated his vigilance. She placed a calming hand on his back, trying to reassure him. "It's okay, Charlie," she murmured. "I think it's just curious." The bear continued its approach, its large brown eyes fixed on Emma. The closer it came, the more she could feel the strange connection building between them. An unspoken understanding. The world around her seemed to quiet, the wind fading, and all that remained was the bear's steady movement and her own deep, steadying breaths. Emma felt as if time had slowed, as though she was suspended in a moment that was both surreal and profound. When the bear finally stopped, it was only a few yards away from Emma, standing still in the soft grass. Charlie let out another low growl, but he didn't move any closer. The bear's gaze never wavered. Instead of the usual look of wild alertness or aggression that one might expect from such a creature, its eyes were calm, almost gentle. The bear wasn't showing any signs of hostility, but rather an almost curious, watchful awareness. Emma's heart beat loudly in her chest as she looked at the bear. Her mind was racing, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. There was something in the way the bear stood there, its eyes locked with hers, that made her feel safe. Oddly enough, safe. It was as if the bear was aware of her, aware that she was no threat, and that she, too, was not afraid. As the minutes passed, Emma's nervousness faded. Instead of wanting to run or hide, she felt a deep sense of calm settle within her. She had encountered many animals in the meadow before, squirrels, deer, birds, but this was different. This was a creature of the wild, something so much larger and more powerful than herself. Yet it didn't pose a danger. It was as if the bear had chosen to approach her, not out of aggression, but out of a silent recognition, a peaceful acceptance. Charlie, still on alert, slowly began to relax, his body uncoiling from the tenseness that had overtaken him. Emma took this as a good sign. She knew that if Charlie trusted the bear, then perhaps she could, too. She spoke quietly to the bear, though she wasn't sure why. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. It was as if she was asking the bear a question and expecting an answer, though she knew it couldn't reply in words. The bear's eyes seemed to soften even more. Its large head tilted slightly, as if it was trying to understand her words. Emma couldn't explain it, but in that moment, she felt an unspoken bond. It was as though the bear knew her, really knew her, understood her in a way that no one else did. It wasn't just a wild animal, it was a being with its own thoughts, its own experiences, and perhaps, even its own quiet understanding of the world. The bear shifted slightly, taking a few cautious steps closer. Emma remained still, her breath calm, her hands resting gently on the arms of her chair. Charlie let out a soft whine. But he didn't move. He was watching the bear closely. But he wasn't acting in the way he did when he sensed a true threat. It was as if, for a moment, all the barriers between human and animal, between civilization and the wild, had dissolved. They were simply beings in the presence of one another. The bear paused again, a few feet closer now, its massive form filling the space before her. Emma could see the details of its fur, how it glistened in the afternoon light, how its muscles rippled with each movement. She could see the intelligence in its eyes, the cautious, respectful way it moved toward her. And in that moment, Emma felt something shift. The bear wasn't just another animal, it was a teacher, a reminder of the power and beauty of nature. It was a part of a world that was so much larger than herself. But it had come here, to this quiet corner of the meadow, to share that world with her. The bear gave one last lingering glance, as if acknowledging Emma for who she was, for her calm presence and her patience. Then, without a sound, it turned and began to walk back toward the forest, its massive body disappearing into the trees. Emma watched until it was gone, her heart still full from the encounter. As the bear disappeared from sight, Charlie stood and nudged Emma's hand, as if to bring her back to the present. She smiled softly at him, rubbing his ears gently. "It's okay, Charlie," she said quietly. "We're safe." For a long while after the bear had gone, Emma sat in the meadow, the soft sounds of the wind and the distant calls of birds filling the silence. She had just shared a moment with a creature of the wild. A moment that would stay with her forever. She couldn't explain it fully, but she knew that this encounter, this calm connection with the bear, was something special, a reminder of the quiet bond that could exist between humans and animals, between all living things, a reminder that even in the vast, unpredictable world of nature, there was always room for understanding, for peace, and for moments of true connection. After the encounter with the bear, Emma found herself lost in thought. The memory of that moment, so vivid and powerful, lingered with her long after the creature had disappeared into the forest. The bear's calm, almost understanding gaze, its presence so close to her, filled her mind with a deep sense of wonder. She had always believed in the magic of nature, in the quiet connections between all living things. But this experience was different. It felt like something more, something unexplainable. As the days passed, Emma found herself reflecting more and more on the bear and that profound moment they had shared. The way the bear had looked at her, not with aggression, but with what she could only describe as kindness and understanding, stayed with her. It was as if the animal had known her, as though it had recognized something in her. Sitting by the window, looking out over the meadow where she had met the bear, Emma recalled the stories her parents had told her when she was younger. They had always spoken of the wilderness surrounding their home, of the animals that roamed the nearby forests, and of the close encounters they had experienced in their own lives. But there was one story, in particular, that stood out in her memory, one that she had heard so many times as a child. Her parents often spoke of a mother bear, a huge, strong animal who had once lived near their campsite when Emma was very young. According to the stories, the bear had always been a part of the forest, a protector of the land and its creatures. The bear was known to approach the camp from time to time, though never in a threatening way. Instead, it seemed to be searching for something that Emma's parents had never fully understood. They spoke of it as if it were a mysterious presence, one that was familiar yet distant, a guardian of the wild. Emma had only been a toddler at the time, and she couldn't remember much of that particular summer. The images were faint, clouded by the haze of her early childhood, but she did recall the sense of safety and calm she had always felt whenever she was outside, surrounded by the beauty of the forest. The bear, from what her parents said, had never caused harm, but had always been a symbol of the wild, majestic and untouchable. Now, sitting quietly with her thoughts, Emma couldn't help but wonder if the bear she had encountered in the meadow was the same one her parents had spoken of. Was it possible that the bear, now older, had returned to the area? After all these years, Emma had never given much thought to the idea that animals could have a memory, could seek out specific places or people. But something about the way the bear had approached her, so calmly, so knowingly, made her think that there was more to the encounter than just chance. Could it be that the bear had recognized her in some way? After all, she had spent so many hours in the park, sitting in the meadow, sketching the wildlife, always with Charlie by her side. Could it be that the bear had somehow sensed her presence, perhaps remembering her parents from the past? She didn't know if that was even possible, but the thought lingered in her mind, a question that seemed to hang in the air. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a soft bark from Charlie, who had been resting beside her as she reflected. He nudged her hand with his nose, bringing her back to the present. She smiled and scratched behind his ears, grateful for his unwavering presence. Charlie had always been there for her, providing comfort and companionship in ways that no one else could. But in that moment, as she thought about the bear, she realized that perhaps Charlie wasn't the only one who understood her in a special way. Perhaps, for just a brief moment, the bear had understood her too. The connection she had felt with the bear, the bond that had been formed in the quiet of the meadow, felt almost spiritual. It was a reminder that the world around her, even the wildest parts of it, was not as distant or disconnected as it sometimes seemed. The bear, in its own way, had recognized her, and she had recognized it. It was a simple moment, one that might seem insignificant to some, but to Emma, it was a moment of profound clarity. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of the bear's eyes remained with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper to their encounter, something she hadn't fully understood yet. What was it about the bear that had made her feel so at peace, so connected to the world around her? Was it just the animal itself? Or was it something more? The forest, the memories of her childhood, the stories her parents had told her about the creatures of the park. In the days that followed, Emma found herself returning to the meadow, hoping to see the bear again. She wasn't sure why, but she felt drawn to that spot, to the place where their paths had crossed. Each time she went, she sat quietly, sketching, waiting. But the bear never appeared. It was as if it had come to her for that one moment, and then moved on. leaving her with nothing but the memory of their encounter. Despite the silence of the forest, Emma didn't feel disappointed. She felt grateful. Grateful for the experience, for the connection she had shared with a wild creature, and for the lessons it had taught her. She realized that sometimes, the most meaningful moments in life didn't need to be repeated. They didn't need to be understood completely. They just needed to be felt. Emma's parents noticed the change in her. They could see that she was quieter, more reflective, as if the encounter had stirred something deep within her. One evening, as they sat together around the dinner table, Emma finally shared her thoughts with them. She told them about the bear, about the way it had looked at her, and about the feeling that had washed over her during their brief meeting. Her parents listened intently, their expressions soft and understanding. After a long pause, her mother spoke. "You know, Emma, I always believed that the animals of the forest have their own way of communicating. Maybe the bear recognized you. In its own way. Maybe it's the connection you've always had with this land." Emma's father nodded, adding, "It's possible, sweetheart. The forest has a way of bringing things full circle. The bear you saw might be the same one from the past. Or it might be a new one. But it sounds like it was meant to cross your path." As Emma listened to her parents, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She realized that the bear's visit wasn't just an ordinary encounter, it was a reminder of the deep connection she had with the world around her, with the creatures of the forest, and with the memories of her childhood. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most meaningful moments in life were those that could never be fully explained, but were simply felt in the heart. The encounter with the bear had left a lasting impression on Emma. The calmness in the bear's eyes, the unspoken connection they shared, stayed with her long after the animal had disappeared back into the forest. Emma couldn't help but think about how rare such a moment was. How it felt like a bridge between the human world and the wild world. It was as if the bear had shared something profound with her, a reminder of the delicate balance that exists between humans and the natural world. After that day, Emma found herself looking at the world around her differently. Her love for animals had always been strong, but now, it was deeper. She realized that there was so much more she could do, not just for the animals she drew, but for their real-life counterparts, too. Emma had always expressed her love for wildlife through her art, but now, she felt a new sense of responsibility. The encounter with the bear had sparked something in her, something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the bear, it was all wildlife. The thought that so many animals, including the bears, were at risk due to human activity weighed heavily on Emma's heart. She knew that the natural habitats of these creatures were disappearing, that the balance between nature and human progress was fragile. She had seen it firsthand in the park, how human presence was often a disruption to the peaceful life of the animals. But she also knew that there were people who cared. People who wanted to protect these creatures and their homes. Emma decided that she would be one of those people. With a newfound sense of purpose, Emma decided to use her talent for art to raise awareness about wildlife conservation, focusing especially on bears, like the one she had met in the meadow. She had always loved drawing, and now she realized that her art could do more than just capture the beauty of nature. It could speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. It could tell a story, raise a voice, and inspire others to take action. Emma started by creating a collection of her bear drawings, each one capturing a different moment, a different aspect of their nature. Some of the drawings depicted the bears in their natural habitats, walking gracefully through the forest or standing tall on their hind legs. Others showed their tender side, like the one Emma had witnessed in the meadow, where the bear's gaze had been calm and peaceful. Through her art, Emma wanted to show the world the true nature of these magnificent creatures, not just the strength they embodied, but the vulnerability they faced in a rapidly changing world. She decided to share her work with the world. And that's when the idea for an online campaign took root. Emma created a social media page where she could share her artwork and raise awareness about wildlife conservation. She titled the campaign, "Bears of the Wild, A Call to Protect." Through this platform, she shared her stories about the bears and other animals she had encountered in the park. She posted her drawings, paired with messages urging people to protect wildlife and their natural habitats. Her posts quickly gained traction. People were moved by the beauty of her drawings and the sincerity of her message. Emma didn't just want to share her art, she wanted to educate people. She shared facts about bears and other wildlife, explaining how their populations were declining due to habitat destruction, poaching, and climate change. She spoke about how important it was to preserve the places where these animals lived, places like Evergreen National Park, where she had experienced her own unforgettable encounter. As Emma's campaign grew, she started receiving messages from people all over the country. Some were parents telling her how her art had inspired their children to care about animals. Others were wildlife enthusiasts who offered support, sharing their own stories of how they had worked to protect animals in their communities. Emma was overwhelmed by the response. She hadn't expected her art to resonate so deeply with others, but it was clear that her message was getting through. People cared, and they wanted to help. But Emma didn't stop there. She knew that raising awareness online was important, but she wanted to do more. She wanted to get involved in the real-world efforts to protect wildlife. So, she began attending local conservation events and joining environmental groups. At these events, she would share her story, talk about the bear she had met, and explain how the experience had changed her. She spoke about how the connection between humans and animals wasn't just about appreciating their beauty. It was about understanding that we all share this planet and that we have a responsibility to protect it. Emma's story was powerful. She wasn't just a young girl who loved animals. She was someone who had experienced a profound connection with the wild. Someone who had seen firsthand the importance of protecting the creatures that roamed the earth. People were moved by her passion and her dedication. She had a way of speaking that made others realize that wildlife conservation wasn't just an issue for scientists or environmentalists, it was an issue for everyone. At one of the events, Emma met a group of park rangers who worked at Evergreen National Park. They were impressed by her commitment and invited her to participate in a community outreach program they were running. The program aimed to teach local schools about wildlife conservation, and they wanted Emma to speak to the students about her experience with the bear and the importance of protecting wildlife. Emma eagerly accepted the invitation. It was a chance to inspire the next generation to care about nature, just as she had been inspired by the beauty of the forest and the creatures within it. When Emma spoke to the students, she shared her story with them, how she had met the bear and how it had changed the way she saw the world. She showed them her drawings and talked about how art could be a powerful tool for raising awareness and inspiring change. The students listened intently, many of them fascinated by Emma's words and her artwork. They asked questions, eager to learn more about the animals in their own backyards, and about how they could help protect the natural world. Emma was proud of the work she was doing. She had found her voice, and she was using it to make a difference. Her art had become a tool for advocacy, a way to connect with people and inspire them to take action. She knew that there was still much work to be done. There were still animals at risk. There were still habitats to protect, but Emma was determined. She had learned that one person, no matter how young, could make a difference. She had seen it with her own eyes. In the eyes of the bear. As Emma continued her campaign and attended more conservation events, she realized that the journey she had started was only just beginning. She was just one person. But with her art, her story, and her passion, she was helping to bring awareness to the plight of wildlife. And with every step she took, she knew she was making a difference, not just for the bears, but for all the creatures that called the wild their home. Through her actions, Emma was showing the world that compassion for nature could unite people, inspire change, and create a better future for all. As the years passed, Emma's connection with nature, and with the wild creatures she had come to love so deeply, grew even stronger. Her campaign to raise awareness about wildlife conservation had gained momentum, and more people were joining the cause. Inspired by the story of the bear and the young girl who had made a difference with nothing but her art and her voice. But even with all the success, Emma never forgot the moment that had changed everything, the day she met the bear in the meadow. One crisp autumn morning, as the wind rustled through the trees and the leaves swirled around her, Emma decided to return to the very spot where her journey had begun. She felt it was time for a personal moment of reflection, a way to honor the connection she had formed with that magnificent creature. She wheeled herself into the meadow, Charlie trotting alongside her, his steady presence offering her the same comfort as it always had. In her lap, Emma held a small wooden bear, intricately carved and smooth to the touch. It was a gift to herself, a symbol of the bond she felt with the bear she had encountered so long ago. She had spent weeks carving it with her own hands, carefully crafting each detail, each curve. The bear wasn't just a piece of wood, it was a representation of everything she had learned from that meeting, of the unspoken communication between herself and the wild, of the lessons she had carried with her every day since that afternoon in the meadow. As she approached the spot where she had met the bear, Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her. The place seemed unchanged, just as beautiful, just as serene, as it had been that day. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying in the wind, and the soft rustling of the grass filled the air. Emma paused for a moment, closing her eyes and breathing in the familiar scents of the forest. She could feel the connection to the land, to the animals, and to everything that made this place special. It was as if the very earth beneath her was whispering a silent welcome. She carefully set the wooden bear down on the grass, placing it gently in the spot where the real bear had stood all those months ago. She took a step back and sat in her wheelchair, her eyes fixed on the small sculpture. In the stillness, Emma felt as though the bear's presence was still with her. Even though it wasn't physically there, she couldn't explain it, but the connection she had felt with that animal, that moment of mutual understanding, had never really left her. It lived within her heart, in her memories, in every piece of art she had created, and in every story she shared about the importance of protecting wildlife. Charlie sat beside her, his calm demeanor a reflection of the peace Emma was feeling. Together, They watched the wind move through the grass. The quiet world around them speaking in a language only those who truly listened could understand. Emma closed her eyes and smiled. She could almost hear the bear's soft, steady breathing, feel the warmth of its gaze as it looked at her with those wise eyes. It was as though the bear had come to remind her that the bond between humans and nature was something that transcended words. The moments stretched on, each one filled with a profound sense of connection. Emma realized that, in a way, the bear had given her more than just the memory of an incredible encounter. It had sparked something in her, a purpose. It had shown her that every creature, no matter how wild, had a place in this world and deserved to be respected, protected, and understood. It had taught her that the beauty of the natural world wasn't just in what we could see, it was in the quiet, unspoken connections that formed when we took the time to truly listen, truly observe. As Emma sat in the meadow, the wooden bear resting beside her, she felt a surge of gratitude for the journey she had undertaken. Her story had reached so many people, young and old, who had been touched by the message she had shared. People had begun to see wildlife in a new light, to recognize that every animal, every plant, every ecosystem was a vital part of the web of life. And Emma had played a part in helping people understand that. Her online campaign had grown into something much bigger than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about drawing pictures of animals anymore. It was about fostering a community of like-minded people who cared about the future of the planet. It was about changing the way people viewed the natural world, and encouraging them to take action, whether that meant supporting conservation efforts, donating to wildlife protection organizations, or simply being more mindful of the impact they had on the environment. The stories that people shared with her, the way they spoke about how her art had inspired them to take action, made Emma realize that her work had done something truly significant. She had helped ignite a spark in others, a spark that had the potential to change the course of the future for wildlife. But more than the recognition, more than the success of her campaign, what Emma cherished most was the deep, unshakable sense of fulfillment she felt when she saw the difference her efforts were making. She could see the change in the world, even if it was just a small part of it. The parks were becoming more protected. People were more aware of the threats to wildlife. And, perhaps most importantly, people were starting to see the natural world not as something to be used and exploited, but as something to be cherished, respected, and preserved. As Emma sat quietly in the meadow, she thought about how far she had come, from that quiet moment with the bear, to the decision to raise her voice, to the campaign that had spread her message across the country. Emma had found her calling. And she knew, deep down, that she wasn't done yet. There was more to be done, more to learn, and more to share. But for now, she allowed herself to simply be in the moment, feeling the presence of the bear in her heart. The world had changed because of her story. And Emma had changed too. She had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known was there. And as she looked out across the meadow, with Charlie by her side and the wooden bear resting beside her, she knew that she was part of something bigger, a movement that was growing, a message that was being heard, and a world that was slowly, but surely, beginning to understand the importance of protecting the wild. The encounter with the bear had been the beginning of her journey. But Emma knew that the story wasn't over. It was only just the start.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.